The heir to the greatest financial empire was celebrating his engagement in a penthouse where the clouds seemed merely a backdrop to his power. A maid, silently clearing away empty glasses, froze for a fraction of a second, her nostrils barely twitching as she walked past the future mistress of the house. She looked at the radiant bride, then at her master, and, leaning close to his ear, whispered words that made time in the room stand still. "This woman smells of bitter almond and elaborate lies, sir. In this room today, it is not your loneliness that will die, but your reputation and everything you have built over the years." The air on the 36th floor of the Alpha Omega Tower always smelled the same. Ozone from the air conditioners, expensive wax used to polish the parquet, and that specific scent of arrogance exuded by people who have never known hardship. But this evening, the familiar cocktail was laced with the scent of triumph. Julian Sebastian Alarcón de la Vega, the sole heir to the Alarcón International conglomerate, stood by the panoramic window, looking at the city that lay at his feet like a loyal dog. His bespoke suit, tailored in the backstreets of London, fit perfectly, hiding the tension in his shoulders that hadn't let go of him for months. Tonight was his night of victory. He was announcing his engagement to a woman the press called the Angel of Mercy, Isabella von Doren. Amidst the sparkle of diamonds and the clinking of the finest baccarat crystal glasses, Beatrice Elena Valdivia was merely a piece of the furniture. In her impeccably starched black dress with a white apron, her hair pulled back into a strict bun, she moved through the hall as if woven from the night air itself. There was an unwritten rule in this house, a law of the penthouse. Those who wear a uniform have no faces, no names, and certainly no feelings. Beatrice knew this rule better than anyone. She had learned to lower her eyes at exactly the right moment and to breathe so quietly that her presence would not disturb the thoughts of those who paid her wages. But Beatrice Elena Valdivia had a secret, one she buried deeper than the chemical burn scars on her arms. 10 years ago, she wasn't holding trays. 10 years ago, she was the queen of fragrances, a leading chemist-perfumer, and the owner of her own brand, Valdivia Essences. Her nose was an instrument worth millions. She could deconstruct any scent into molecules, sensing fear, lust, or falsehood in a person from just the faintest trace left on their skin. She knew everything about chemistry, from how jasmine petals yield their soul to oil, to how synthetic compounds can manipulate human consciousness. Her empire collapsed overnight when she was betrayed by a man she had trusted not only with her formulas, but with her life. She lost her laboratories, her patents, and her name. To survive and ensure a future for her daughter, who dreamed of science, Beatrice erased her past, trading her lab coat for a maid's apron. She thought the world would never need her gift again, that she would forever remain in the shadow of someone else's brilliance. But fate is a perfumer with a cruel sense of humor, and it had prepared a meeting for Beatrice for which she was not ready. When Isabella von Doren entered the hall, blinding the guests with her beauty in an ivory dress, Beatrice sensed it instantly. It wasn't the scent of expensive Chanel or Dior perfumes that Isabella had dabbed on her wrists for the public. No. Beatrice caught something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible note breaking through the floral facade. It was the smell of Cyaneris X, the rarest alkaloid, banned from public sale, synthesized in classified military laboratories. Beatrice had studied this compound herself at the university. It smelled specific, like bitter almond mixed with damp earth and steel. In the world of high chemistry, this compound was called a conscience eraser. When ingested in certain doses, it caused short-term amnesia and a state of heightened suggestibility. A person remained conscious. They could smile, speak, and even sign documents, but their will was not their own. 2 hours later, the effect would wear off, leaving only a mild headache and an absolute void in their memory of the events of the past hour. Beatrice looked at Isabella. She was standing next to Julian, her hand resting gently on his elbow, but her eyes, the cold, calculating eyes of a predator, were fixed on a leather folder held by the Alarcón de la Vega family lawyer, Rodrigo Castillo. Inside that folder was a document transferring operational control of the fund's assets in the event of marriage. Isabella wasn't just getting married. She was preparing to devour this empire, wiping Julian's identity for just 30 minutes, time enough to secure a single signature. Beatrice's heart beat so hard, it felt like it would tear through her tight blouse. She had seen this before. She had seen how greed turns people into monsters. She remembered her father, old Don Valdivia, who always told her, "Beatrice, your nose is a gift from God to see the truth where others see only beauty. Never betray this gift." She looked at Julian. He wasn't a bad man. He was the only one in this house who sometimes nodded to her in the hallway and asked how she was, although he never waited for an answer. He was lonely in his golden penthouse, surrounded by sharks in expensive suits, and right now he stood on the edge of an abyss, unaware that the woman he wanted to make his wife had already prepared poison for him. Beatrice Elena Valdivia made a decision. She knew that breaking the silence would mean being fired without a reference, that she could end up on the street, that her daughter wouldn't get an education. But to remain silent now meant becoming an accomplice to the murder of a man's soul. She approached Julian with a tray holding a fresh round of aperitifs. Her movements were calculated by years of service. She waited for the moment when Isabella was distracted by another dose of flattery from the guests, and when Julian reached for a glass. At that instant, she closed the distance, violating all boundaries of class propriety. Her voice, usually devoid of intonation, sounded low and vibrating, like a forgotten double bass string. "Do not drink this, Julian," she began, and her eyes met his for a second. In that gaze, for the first time, he saw not a maid, but a woman who knew more about the world than all his advisors combined. "She smells of bitter almond." Julian flinched. He wasn't used to the servants addressing him by name, and certainly not so familiarly. His first reaction was anger, a desire to call the manager and throw this mad woman out. But something in her voice, some terrifying, scientific certainty, made him freeze. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed through his teeth, trying to maintain a smile for the guests. "I am taking liberty of saving your life, sir." Beatrice held her ground, her hand on the tray as steady as a rock. Look closely at the rim of her glass. Do you see those microscopic oily streaks? That is not wine. That is your future turned to dust. She does not love you, Julian. She loves your signatures. And today, she intends to take the last of them. At that moment, Isabella von Doren turned around. Her perfect face distorted for a moment when she saw the maid whispering with her fiancé. She took a step toward them, and the scent of Cyaneris X hit Beatrice in the face with renewed force. It was the smell of the end. Isabella smiled her most charming smile, but deep in her pupils, a fire of hatred ignited. "Darling, is there a problem with the service?" she asked, and her voice was like honey laced with a drop of tar. Julian looked at Beatrice, then at Isabella, and the glass in his hand trembled ever so slightly. The grand game was just beginning, and the invisible maid had just made the first move on a chessboard where an entire empire was at stake. Julian Sebastian Alarcón de la Vega froze, feeling a cold wave run down his spine. His hand, holding a glass of priceless Chateau Petrus, went numb for a moment. He looked at Beatrice, a woman he had seen in his house every day for 3 years, but whom, as he now realized with frightening clarity, he didn't know at all. In her eyes, usually dull and submissive, there now burned the cold fire of superior knowledge. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't warning. He was stating a fact, like a surgeon before making a fatal incision. Isabella von Doren took another step toward them. The train of her dress rustled across the expensive carpet, and the sound reminded Beatrice of a snake hissing in dry grass. Isabella was perfection itself, porcelain-like skin, a smile men would die for, and that gaze, innocent and meek. But to Beatrice, whose nose was sharper than any lie detector, Isabella was a walking chemical equation of disaster. The scent of cyanurous X now mingled with the aroma of her fear and irritation. Isabella wasn't used to the furniture, which was exactly how she perceived Beatrice, making sounds. "Julian, darling, why aren't you drinking?" Isabella gently touched his shoulder, but her fingers dug into the fabric of his jacket a little harder than tenderness required. "Our guests are waiting for a toast. Lawyer Castillo has already prepared all the papers for the formal unification of our interests. That is what we dreamed of, isn't it?" Julian slowly shifted his gaze to the glass. Now, after Beatrice's words, he saw what he hadn't noticed before. An oily film, barely visible under a certain angle of light from the massive chandeliers, lazily shimmered on the surface of the wine. These weren't the legs of the wine that speak of its age and quality. They were traces of an alien invasion. His mind wrestled with the obvious. Isabella, the woman he had trusted with his broken heart after his father's death, was preparing to turn him into a puppet. Meanwhile, Beatrice slowly retreated to her designated distance. She became a shadow once more. She knew her fate was hanging by a thread right now. The thought of Sophia, her daughter, pulsed in her head. Sophia was probably sitting in their cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city right now, surrounded by organic chemistry textbooks, dreaming of laboratories and discoveries. If Julian ordered the guards to throw Beatrice out now, it would all be over. The dirty streets, no job, the collapse of a dream. But Beatrice couldn't do otherwise. She remembered the smell of burning in her own laboratory 10 years ago. She remembered the face of her partner, Esteban, who watched the fire devour her patents and smiled exactly as Isabella was smiling now. Esteban. Back then, Beatrice was too trusting. She was an artist of sense, a creator who believed that numbers and contracts were merely a boring necessity. She had built Valdivia essences from nothing, using only intuition and the knowledge passed down from her father. Her perfume, Night Andalus, conquered Paris, and the formula for Tears of the Rose was considered an unattainable pinnacle. But Esteban, her right hand, slowly and methodically replaced documents, transferred accounts, and, ultimately, set the fire that destroyed not only her business, but her reputation. She was accused of insurance fraud. No one listened to her explanations. Her name became synonymous with deception in the world of high perfumery. She survived only for her daughter's sake. She changed her name, hid her diplomas, and learned to masterfully wield a mop and a vacuum cleaner. But chemistry remained in her blood. Every time she polished silver or removed stains from silk sheets, she saw molecular chains. She knew that vinegar and baking soda were the simplest baseline, but the world around her was much more complex. She knew that cyanurous X wasn't just a tranquilizer. It's a substance that blocks synaptic connections in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. It leaves a person functional, but strips them of their capacity for critical analysis. The perfect tool for a corporate takeover. Isabella von Doren was clearly connected to the same structures that had once destroyed Beatrice. Perhaps behind this beauty stood the very same Esteban or someone from his circle. Beatrice could smell their signature. Cold, calculating, and infinitely cruel. "I beg your pardon, Doña Isabella." Beatrice's voice sounded even and professional, though everything inside her was trembling. "I noticed a speck of dust from the air conditioner reflected in Sir Julian's glass. Please allow me to replace it with a fresh one. We cannot allow anything to be less than perfect on such an evening." Isabella turned sharply to the maid. Her eyes narrowed into two icy slits. She felt a threat, not from the words, but from the very posture of this woman. Servants weren't supposed to interfere. This wasn't in the script. "Leave it," Isabella snapped. "A speck of dust is no reason to fuss. Go to the kitchen and oversee the serving of the hot dishes." "But, Madame," Beatrice did not lower her head. "I said, get out!" Isabella's voice broke into a barely audible hiss. Julian, who had been silent all this time, suddenly raised his hand. He looked at his fiancée as if seeing her for the first time. The noise of the party around them began to die down. The guests, politicians, bankers, stars, began turning to watch the strange scene. In the center of the hall stood the heir to the empire, his dazzling bride, and a maid who dared to object. "Isabella, Beatrice is right," Julian said quietly. "I see it too, a speck of dust, or something else. Let's replace the wine. We have another 50 cases of this vintage in the cellar." He handed the glass to Beatrice, but Isabella intercepted his hand with lightning speed. Her fingers squeezed Julian's wrist with unexpected force. "There's no need, my love. You're just overworked. Drink this glass, and we'll sign the papers. Rodrigo is in a hurry. He has a flight to New York in 3 hours. Let's get the formalities over with." The lawyer Rodrigo Castillo, a heavy-set man with a face resembling a bulldog, approached them, rustling the leather of his folder. He had been a loyal dog to the Alarcón de la Vega family for 30 years. But Beatrice knew, even the most loyal dogs can be bought if offered a juicy enough piece of meat. The lawyer smelled of expensive tobacco and the very same Cianurus X. Beatrice understood. He wasn't just a witness. He was an accomplice. He knew what was in the glass. "Sir Julian," Castillo boomed, "time waits for no one. Your signatures on this agreement will guarantee the stability of the shares at tomorrow's opening bell. It's merely protocol. Drink to the union of two great families." Julian looked at Beatrice again. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. It was a risk. If he believed her, he would save the company. If not, he would lose everything. "All right," Julian suddenly smiled, and that smile was fake to the last drop. "But I want to drink to our union from my father's glasses. Beatrice, fetch them from the study. Isabella, darling, you don't mind, do you? It's a tradition." Isabella was taken aback for a moment. She couldn't object to the memory of his late father, whom Julian worshipped. "Of course, darling, but—" "Beatrice, go," Julian ordered. "And take this glass. Pour it out. I don't want to drink wine with dust in it." Beatrice took the glass from his hands. She felt Isabella's gaze boring into her back, promising slow and painful retribution. But as Beatrice turned to walk toward the doors leading to the staff area, Julian did something no one expected. He dropped his heavy gold lighter on the floor. The ringing of metal against the parquet made everyone jump. In the commotion, as Julian bent down to pick it up, Beatrice was hidden behind his back for a moment. It lasted no more than 2 seconds. Her hands, accustomed to precise manipulations with vials, worked flawlessly. She didn't go to the study. She knew there was no time. Passing the table where Isabella's and lawyer Castillo's untouched glasses stood, she performed an impossible swap. She didn't just swap the glasses. She knew Isabella would be watching her every move. Therefore, Beatrice used an old perfumer's trick, distraction through scent. Unnoticed, she crushed a tiny capsule of concentrated bergamot essential oil, which she always carried in her pocket, just in case, between her fingers. The sharp, bright aroma instantly filled the space around them, forcing Isabella to instinctively sniff the air and lose her concentration for a fraction of a second. It was enough. When Beatrice stepped into the light, she held a tray. On it was one empty glass and a bottle of water. "Sir, the key to the safe with your father's glasses was not in the study," she said loudly. "It seems the manager took it. Allow me to bring the regular crystal ones from the dining room." She placed the tray on the table. Isabella looked at her with suspicion, but the glass with the poison, or so she thought, had already disappeared. In reality, it stood right in front of her, disguised as her own aperitif. Beatrice had masterfully shuffled them, so that the oily film was now in Isabella's glass, and the pure Petrus was in the lawyer's hand. "It doesn't matter," Isabella said in irritation. "Let's just get this over with. Rodrigo, hand over the documents." She reached for her glass to wet her throat before the final strike. Beatrice held her breath. She watched as Isabella's slender, ring-adorned fingers closed around the stem of the glass. The penthouse hall fell dead silent. The music stopped. Everyone awaited the moment of truth. Beatrice Elena Valdivia stood by the wall, having once again turned into a faceless servant. She knew, in 15 minutes, the angel of mercy would begin to lose her grip on reality. The Cianurus X compound would begin its work, but not in the brain for which it was intended. Beatrice felt the woman who once controlled millions awakening inside her. The maid died in that second. The perfumer had returned. Julian picked up the pen. Lawyer Castillo laid out the papers on the glass table. "Sign here, Julian," Isabella whispered sweetly, taking a large sip from her glass. "And we will be free. We will own this world together." She drank it all to the bottom. Beatrice saw her pupils dilate for a moment, then constrict to pinpoints. Chemistry knows no mercy. Chemistry knows no titles. It simply does what it must. "Yes," Julian replied, looking straight into Isabella's eyes. "We truly will be free. But I'm afraid, darling, our definitions of freedom will soon sharply diverge." He did not sign. He slowly placed the pen on the table and turned to Beatrice. "Beatrice," he said, and the name now sounded like an acknowledgement. "It seems our guest and the lawyer are not feeling well. Could you please call, not the doctors, but my personal security detail, and lock the doors? No one leaves this penthouse until we figure out the composition of this vintage." Isabella's face slowly began to melt. Her muscles relaxed, her gaze became cloudy. She tried to say something, but only an inarticulate mumble escaped her mouth. Lawyer Castillo, who had also taken a sip from his glass, slumped heavily into a chair, his folder dropping from his hands, sending documents cascading like a fan. Among them, Beatrice saw a familiar logo. The logo of the company that had once swallowed her remnants. The circle was complete. The ghosts of the past had returned to collect their debts, and tonight, Beatrice Valdivia was going to take everything back down to the last cent. The silence that fell over the penthouse of the Alpha Omega Tower wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, tangible substance, like the pressure deep in the ocean. The guests, the elite of this city, people used to controlling the fates of entire countries, froze with half smiles on their faces, not understanding where the society gala ended and the crime drama began. Julian Sebastian Alarcón de la Vega stood motionless, his figure against the night sky looking as if cast from cold lead. Isabella von Doren, the angel of mercy and owner of an empire in 5 minutes' time, now looked like a broken doll. Her gaze, recently sharp and predatory, had become watery and vacant. The Cyaneris X compound began its ruthless march through her neural pathways. Beatrice Elena Valdivia observed this process with professional detachment. She watched Isabella's facial muscles relax, her shoulders slump, and her will, that same steel will that had allowed her to infiltrate the bed and heart of the air, dissolve into the oily liquid Beatrice had so deftly transferred into her glass. Lawyer Rodrigo Castillo, on the other hand, was in a state of mounting panic. He hadn't drunk the wine, but he saw what happened. His eyes darted around the room searching for an exit, but the heavy oak doors of the penthouse had already been locked down. On Julian's signal, Beatrice had managed to press the panic button under the buffet table even before the masks finally fell. "Julian, darling, why is it so dark?" Isabella's voice sounded strange, devoid of any intonation, flat and dry. She reached out to Julian, but missed by a good 10 centimeters. "Where are the papers? We need to finish. Esteban is waiting." Beatrice shuddered. That name, Esteban. Under the influence of the drug, Isabella had lost the ability to filter information. She uttered the name of the man who had destroyed Beatrice's life 10 years ago. Now there was no doubt. This wasn't just an attempted marriage fraud. This was the final stage of a multi-year operation to seize the assets of Alarcón International, orchestrated by the same shadows that had once devoured Valdivia essences. Julian slowly approached Isabella. He took her by the chin, forcing her to look at him. His face was pale but calm, the very calm that washes over a captain of a sinking ship when he suddenly spots the breach. "Who is Esteban, Isabella?" he asked quietly. "And what exactly is he waiting for?" "Esteban, he said you would sign," Isabella smiled blissfully, her mind now floating in a pink fog of suggestibility. "You will sign, and everything will be shared. And then you will simply leave completely, like your father." Julian felt his heart skip a beat. His father had died of sudden cardiac arrest 2 years ago. The official conclusion stated natural causes, stress, old age. But now, in the light of Isabella's confessions, the air distinctly smelled of murder. At that moment, Lawyer Castillo tried to make a dash for the table to grab the leather folder of documents. He moved fast for his weight, but Beatrice, who all these years had trained not only her nose, but her reflexes by working at the frantic pace of elite service, was faster. She didn't scream. She simply stuck out her foot, and the heavy-set lawyer crashed onto the carpet with a thud, sprawling full length. "Beatrice." Julian looked at the maid who had just neutralized his chief legal counsel. "Come here." Beatrice stepped out of the shadows. She no longer hid her gaze. She walked toward Julian across the entire hall, and with every step, the starched maid's apron seemed to transform into a judge's robe. The guests parted before her, sensing the terrifying confidence emanating from this woman. "Explain to me what is happening to her." Julian pointed at Isabella. "And why is she telling the truth she hid so carefully?" Beatrice stopped next to Julian. The aroma of bergamot from the crushed capsule in her pocket still lingered around her, creating a protective cocoon. "She is under the influence of Cyanurus X, Sir Julian. In perfumery and chemistry, it's called an agent of openness. It disables volitional control and critical thinking. Right now, she is incapable of lying. She is a mirror reflecting their entire conspiracy. You asked why she smelled of almond? It's a side effect of the alkaloid's metabolism. Her pores exude this scent when the brain begins to surrender." "You said I would leave. Like my father." Julian turned to Beatrice, his voice trembling. "Did you know about my father?" "I knew that his death was not just caused by old age, sir. I was working here when he died. That night, his room didn't smell of medicine, but of ozonus M, another compound that mimics a heart attack, leaving no trace in the blood after 4 hours. But I was just a maid. Who would have listened to me? I had no proof, except my nose. But today we have living proof." Beatrice pointed at Isabella. At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and 4 men in dark suits with earpieces entered the hall. This was the Alarcon family's personal guard, answering only to Julian. They were followed by a woman with a hard face and a folder tucked under her arm, Carla Mendez, head of internal security. "Sir, did you call?" Carla assessed the situation in a second. Her gaze fell on the lawyer lying on the floor and the drooling bride. "What happened?" Julian didn't answer Carla. He looked at Beatrice. "Carla, take Castillo's folder. The documents transferring control of the fund are in there. And check all camera footage for the last 3 hours. Pay special attention to how Isabella von Doren interacted with the lawyer before dinner started. But most importantly," Julian paused, and his gaze became unbearably heavy. "Beatrice Elena Valdivia no longer works in this house as a maid. From this second on, she is my personal consultant with unlimited authority. Whatever she says is law for the security team. Carla, ensure full protection for her and her daughter. I feel that the Esteban this woman mentioned will soon reveal himself." Carla Mendez frowned, looking at Beatrice. Her professional instincts resisted such a sudden elevation of a servant, but she knew Julian. He never made baseless decisions. "Yes, sir. What about the guests?" "The evening is over." Julian turned to the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this performance. My people will show you out. Tomorrow, my press center will issue an official statement. But for now, leave." As the hall slowly began to empty under the strict supervision of the guards, Julian sank into the armchair next to Beatrice. He looked as if he had aged 10 years. Isabella sat on the floor, studying the patterns on the carpet and humming something under her breath. Lawyer Castillo had already been taken to a separate room for a preventative chat. "Beatrice," Julian covered his eyes with his hand. "You saved me. Again. Why didn't you leave sooner? With your knowledge, with your talent. Why did you endure these 3 years, cleaning my things and serving drinks to people who are not worthy of you?" Beatrice looked at her hands. The very hands that once mixed essences for Arab sheikhs, and then were corroded by bleach and lye for years. "I have a daughter, Julian. Sophia. She was 5 when we were thrown out onto the street.
After Esteban framed me for the fire in the laboratory, my name was blacklisted by all the corporations. I couldn't even get a job as a lab assistant in a school.
I didn't want to sell my nose to criminals. My father taught me that fragrance should heal the soul, not kill it. So I erased myself. I became invisible. A shadow is easier to control than the light. But I never stopped learning. I knew that one day they would come for you too. People like Esteban don't stop at one victim. They are like mold. They take over every space until nothing clean is left. Julian lifted his head. Tears glistened in his eyes. Your daughter. Does she know who her mother really is? She knows her mother is a maid who loves chemistry very much. I bought her books with the tip money you left on holidays. She dreams of becoming a great scientist, and I will do everything to make sure her dreams smell of success, not ashes. Julian stood up and approached Beatrice. He took her hand, carefully, as if afraid of breaking a fragile treasure. Beatrice, you said Esteban is waiting for the signature. That means he is somewhere nearby. If he finds out the plan failed, he'll try to destroy the evidence. Isabella, Castillo, and you. Beatrice nodded. She understood that. The smell of danger in this room became even sharper, overpowering even the scent of bitter almond. She could feel that somewhere in the bowels of the city, a beast that considered itself invulnerable was stirring. We need to lure him out, Beatrice said, and her voice sounded like a general's command. Isabella is still under the influence of the drug. We have another hour and a half before she regains her senses and realizes she gave everyone up. We can use her phone. We'll text him that the signature is secured, but there are problems with the lawyer, and he needs to come personally to pick up the originals. Julian looked at Beatrice with admiration. Do you think he'll come? Greed is the strongest scent, Julian. It overpowers all other senses, including caution. He will come. He will want to see the collapse of the Alarcon Empire with his own eyes. And at that moment, we will present him with his own collapse. But I need a laboratory right here in this building. I need to prepare a welcome gift for my old friend Esteban. Beatriz Elena Valdivia smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had waited 10 years for revenge. And this revenge promised to be the most exquisite composition of her life. Night over the metropolis had fully taken hold, turning the penthouse's panoramic windows into black mirrors that reflected the new reality of the Alarcón de la Vega family. The festive lights were dimmed, the music had stopped, giving way to the functional hum of servers and the quiet rustle of guards' footsteps. The penthouse was no longer a place of celebration. It had transformed into an operational headquarters, where the invisible thread of fate was weaving into a noose for the one who had considered himself the puppeteer for too long. Beatriz Elena Valdivia stood in the spacious kitchen, which for tonight had become her makeshift laboratory. She took off her white apron, the symbol of her 3-year voluntary slavery, and neatly folded it on the marble countertop. There was no longer any subservient fuss in her movements. Now, every gesture was dictated by the iron logic of a scientist. Julian watched her from the doorway, not daring to interrupt this sacred process. He watched her work with the little she managed to find in the house: expensive spices, collectible essential oils from Isabella's spa area, and a few pure chemicals from the first aid kit. "What are you doing, Beatrice?" Julian asked quietly. "You look like you're about to summon a demon." Beatrice didn't turn around. She carefully dripped a clear liquid from a tiny pipette into a crystal vial. "In a way, yes, Julian. Esteban Martinez is a man who doesn't believe in morality, but he believes in his senses. He thinks he controls the world because he understands the weaknesses of others.
But he forgot one thing. He himself has an Achilles heel.
He is obsessed with control. What I am preparing now is not poison in the usual sense. It is mnemonic Z, a composition I began developing even before he burned my life down. It's a scent that triggers a sharp release of cortisol and adrenaline, mimicking the state of a panic attack, while sharpening memory to a painful extreme. He will see the truth, and this truth will crush him from the inside. She closed the vial and slowly turned to Julian. In her gaze there was so much pain and triumph simultaneously that Julian found it hard to breathe for a moment. 10 years ago he told me that my talent was just a beautiful addition to his business acumen. He thought he could take the formulas and throw the person in the trash. Today he will understand that formulas without a soul are just dirt, and the spirit of a master cannot be destroyed, even if you make them clean other people's toilets for 3 years. Julian stepped closer. He felt the social chasm between them had finally disappeared. In this kitchen, there was no longer a billionaire and a maid. They were two allies, saved from the exact same darkness. Carla has already sent the message from Isabella's phone, he said, glancing at his watch. Julian is broken. Signature on paper. Castillo is hysterical. Come immediately via the service elevator. Access code active. Beatrice nodded. He will come. Esteban always preferred to claim his prey in person. He loves the moment of triumph. He'll want to see your face, Julian, when you realize you no longer own a single cent. It's his drug. Meanwhile, below, in the dark belly of the city, a matte black limousine was already gliding towards the Alpha Omega Tower. Inside sat a man whose face was hidden by deep shadows. Esteban Martinez, the gray cardinal of shadow takeovers, adjusted his shirt cuffs. He had received the message from Isabella and now felt a pleasant tingling in his fingertips. For 10 years he had waited for this moment. First, he destroyed Valdivia, his most talented student and most dangerous competitor. Now it was time to devour the Alarcons, old blood that had grown too relaxed in the glow of its wealth. Esteban always considered Isabella his best creation. He found her in a cheap modeling agency, taught her manners, chemistry, the art of manipulation, and embedded her into Julian's inner circle like a virus in a computer network. The plan was flawless. The death of the old Don Alarcon was merely a prelude, and today was the finale. The limousine stopped smoothly at the inconspicuous staff entrance. Esteban stepped out, giving a careless nod to the driver. He knew this path. He knew the codes. He felt like the master of this building, although his name didn't officially appear on a single document. The service elevator silently carried him up to the top of the world. On the 36th floor, the elevator doors opened. Esteban stepped into the corridor leading to the penthouse. It smelled here exactly as a crime scene should smell, of silence and a faint scent of ozone. He confidently strode toward the massive doors. When he entered the living room, he was met with semi-darkness. Only a few lamps illuminated the area by the panoramic window. Julian sat in a deep armchair with his back to the door, looking out at the city. On the table before him lay that very same leather folder. "Bravo, Julian," Esteban's voice broke the silence. A voice laced with venomous superiority. "You made the right decision. Resistance would only have prolonged your agony. Isabella said you were reasonable." Esteban approached the table, his hand already reaching for the folder. He didn't notice that neither Isabella nor Castillo were in the room. His mind was clouded by the anticipation of victory. "Where is she?" he threw out, not looking at Julian. "Isabella was supposed to wait for me here. We need to discuss the details of your departure."
Julian slowly spun his chair around.
His face was calm, almost lifeless. "She is resting, Esteban. The dose turned out to be slightly stronger than she planned for me. You know, chemistry is a tricky thing. An error of one molecule can turn the hunter into the prey." Esteban froze. Suspicion flared in his eyes. He finally looked around and noticed that the atmosphere in the room had subtly changed. The air was different. He caught a strange note, cold, metallic, piercing the consciousness like an ice needle. "What are you talking about, Alarcon? Where are the papers?" "The papers are here." A woman's voice rang out from the dark, sending shivers down Esteban's spine. He hadn't heard this voice in 10 years, but it haunted his nightmares every night after the fire in the lab. A woman stepped out of the shadows. She was not wearing a maid's uniform. She was dressed in a strict dark dress that Julian had found in his sister's wardrobe. Her hair was down, and an old silver pendant hung around her neck, the Valdivia family crest. In her hands, she held the very same crystal vial she had just filled in the kitchen. "Beatrice?" Esteban whispered, his face slowly draining of color. This can't be. You are dead. You disappeared." Beatrice took a step into the light. The scent from the vial began to take effect. Esteban felt his heart start to beat in a frantic rhythm, his palms instantly growing damp and bloody spots swimming before his eyes. This wasn't magic. It was supreme biochemistry in action. "I was dead to the world you built on lies, Esteban," she said, her voice ringing like steel. "For 3 years I dusted this house, watching you spin your web around Julian. I saw your every move. I smelled your fear in the letters you sent to Isabella. I knew you would come." Esteban tried to take a step back, but his legs turned to jelly. The panic, artificially induced by the scent, paralyzed his will. You set this up," he wheezed.
"You switched the formula in the glass!"
"Not me, Esteban. Justice switched it. You yourself taught me that in this game, the one with the sharpest nose survives. You thought Isabella was your perfect tool? She's merely a perfumery counterfeit. And counterfeits always expose themselves at the first test." Julian stood up from his chair and approached Esteban. He looked at him with such deep contempt that the antagonist involuntarily shrank. "Carla Mendez has already called the feds, Esteban. We have the camera recordings, Isabella's confessions made under the influence of your own drug, and a complete history of your financial fraud, which Beatrice helped me piece together over the last 3 hours. You didn't just lose. You are erased." Esteban looked at Beatrice. There was nothing left in his gaze but animalistic terror. He saw before him not a maid, nor even a former partner. He saw the embodiment of his greatest fear, the person he could not break. "Why didn't you kill me then?" he squeezed out. "You had so many chances in this house." Beatrice walked right up to him. She opened the vial, and the concentrated essence hit Esteban in the face. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat. "Because death is too easy a way out for you, Esteban. My father taught me that a fragrance should heal, and today I will heal you of your pride. You will live out the rest of your days in a concrete box, and the only thing that will haunt you is the smell of bitter almond and the ashes of my laboratory. You will remember every second of your downfall. That is my final masterpiece for you." At that moment, the penthouse doors burst open, and a SWAT team stormed the hall. Blinding beams of flashlights cut through the gloom. Shouts of "SWAT moving in" filled the space. Esteban Martinez, the grand schemer and predator,
was led away in handcuffs. He was sobbing like a child, choking on the scent that had turned his soul inside out.
Beatrice stood by the window, watching the police sirens below paint the street in red and blue. Julian approached her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all over, Beatrice. You're free." Beatrice closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The air in the penthouse began to clear. The smell of lies faded, giving way to a fresh breeze from the ocean. "No, Julian," she answered without opening her eyes. "It's only just beginning. Tomorrow morning I have to take my daughter to school. And for the first time in 10 years, I will do so under my real name." But she didn't yet know that Julian Alarcon had prepared a proposal for her that would forever change the hierarchy of the Alpha Omega Tower. Isabella von Doren and her conspiracy were merely the tip of the iceberg, and Beatrice Elena Valdivia was the only person capable of guiding the empire through the coming storms. The first rays of the sun touched the spire of the Alpha Omega Tower, painting the sky in colors of rose gold and cold silver. An unusual, almost deafening silence settled over the 36th floor penthouse. The echo of police sirens below gradually faded, dissolving into the waking hum of the metropolis. The air, which just hours ago was steeped in the scent of bitter almond and sticky betrayal, now felt crystal clear. A window was cracked open, and the fresh ocean breeze had finally blown away the remnants of the chemical conspiracy that nearly buried one of the world's greatest empires. Julian Sebastian Alarcon de la Vega stood by the bar counter, but he held not an expensive cognac, but a glass of simple ice water. He looked at Beatrice Elena Valdivia, who was sitting in a deep leather armchair, the very chair where ministers and bank presidents usually sat. She was still wearing that dark dress, but now it seemed not a disguise, but armor. She was no longer a maid. She was a master who had reclaimed her throne. "You know, Beatrice," Julian said quietly, without turning around, "all my life I thought security meant high fences, armored limousines, and an army of men with guns. I paid millions to ensure my world was impenetrable. But tonight I realized that the most terrible threat doesn't break down your door. It walks in with a smile, sleeps in your bed, and hands you documents to sign that smell of flowers. My security let a wolf in sheep's clothing through because they looked at IDs, but they didn't look into her eyes. And you saw the truth through scent." Beatrice looked up. The morning sun reflected in her eyes. "My father always said, 'Beatrice, people can deceive sight. They can control their voice and even their thoughts. But their chemistry never lies. The body is a highly complex laboratory. When a person is afraid, when they crave power, or when they prepare to stab you in the back, their scent changes. To most, it is imperceptible. To me, it sounds like a scream in an empty room." Julian approached her and placed a slim tablet on the table in front of her. "Carla Mendez has finished the preliminary report. Isabella von Doren began giving statements as soon as the drug wore off and real handcuffs clicked on her wrists. She was just a pawn. Esteban Martinez used her to get to my father's archives. It turns out my father began suspecting Esteban of manipulating the supply of raw materials for our perfumery branch a month before he died. He was gathering evidence. That's exactly why he was killed. And that's why they were hunting so desperately for my signature. They needed to legalize the takeover of the assets before the auditors uncovered the truth." Beatrice touched the tablet screen. There, among the list of seized accounts, she saw the name Valdivia Essences. Her heart skipped a beat.
They didn't just destroy me 10 years ago, Julian. They've been using my patents all this time. That perfume Isabella wore tonight, at its core was my farewell to summer formula, which I never got to release.
They stole even my memories. Julian sat across from her. His face was serious and resolute. Not anymore, Beatrice. Today my legal department filed a lawsuit for the full restoration of your copyrights and reputation. In a week, the Valdivia Essences brand will be officially returned to you. All damages for the last 10 years will be recovered from Esteban's assets. But I am asking you not to leave. Beatrice raised her eyebrows in surprise. I have a proposal that might seem strange to you after 3 years of cleaning my carpets, Julian chuckled. I am creating a new department at Alarcon International. It will be called the Department of Strategic Intuition and Biochemical Security. Its task is to keep people like Esteban and Isabella from ever crossing the threshold of this building. I need someone who sees a lie before it is even spoken. I need your nose, your brain, and your loyalty. You will report only to me. Your salary will equal that of a vice president, and your daughter, Sophia, will receive a full grant to study in any chemical laboratory in the world. Beatrice Elena Valdivia was silent for a long time. She remembered the cold winters when she had no money for heating, and she warmed her daughter's hands with her breath. She remembered the humiliating remarks of Julian's guests, who didn't even notice her filling their glasses. And she remembered the face of her father, Don Valdivia. I accept your proposal, Julian Alarcon de la Vega, she said slowly. But on one condition. Which is? I will choose my own team. And they won't be business school graduates. They will be the ones this world is used to ignoring. Cleaners, drivers, waiters. The shadow people. Because they are exactly the ones who know more about the masters of life than the masters know about themselves. We will become the eyes and ears of this empire. Julian held out his hand to her. Agreed. From this day forward, the Alpha Omega Tower will smell only of the truth. 6 months passed. There was a heavy press presence at the courthouse where the final hearing for Esteban Martinez and Rodrigo Castillo was taking place. When the courtroom doors swung open, a woman walked out into the corridor whose appearance made the reporters momentarily forget their cameras. Beatrice Elena Valdivia looked the epitome of elegance in a navy blue Armani suit. Her gaze was direct and clear. Beside her walked a young girl, Sophia. She held her mother's hand, and her eyes radiated not just love, but endless admiration. She knew now that her mother was not just a maid, but a legend risen from the ashes. Esteban Martinez, being led by the guards, paused for a second opposite Beatrice. He looked broken, aged by 20 years. He sniffed the air, hoping to catch even a drop of fear in her scent. But Beatrice smelled only of her new perfume, a fragrance she called justice. It was a composition of white cedar, ozone, and a faint note of wild rose. The scent of a power that cannot be bought. You won, Beatrice, he rasped. But remember, the world will always see you as the one who took out the trash. Beatrice smiled at him, calmly and almost mercifully. You're wrong, Esteban. The world sees what I allow it to see. And while you rot in prison, remembering the smell of your victories, I will be building a future
in which people like you cannot breathe. That same evening, Beatrice returned to the penthouse of the Alpha Omega Tower. She no longer lived on the outskirts. Julian had given her the apartment one floor below his own. She walked into her new laboratory, equipped with the latest technology. On the desk stood a photograph of her father. Beatrice walked over to the window. The city below glowed with lights. She saw shadows moving in the windows of offices and residential buildings, hundreds of people in uniforms, invisible and voiceless.
She knew that behind every apron and every tray could hide a genius, a poet, or a scientist whom life had forced into silence. She opened a vial and dabbed a drop of essence on her wrist. It was the scent of hope. The story of Beatrice Valdivia is not just a tale about exposing fraudsters. It is a reminder to each of us. We are used to judging people by their clothes, their social status, and the work they do. We walk past the maid without saying hello. We don't look the waiter in the eye. We believe that those who serve us are merely the backdrop of our grand lives. But remember, the true master of the house is not the one who owns the walls, but the one who knows its secrets. And sometimes the person dusting your desk is the only one capable of seeing the deadly snake of betrayal slithering across it. Never humiliate those who seem weak to you, for behind the smell of bleach and cheap soap may hide the aroma of supreme intellect, which one day will save everything you hold dear. And those who build their greatness on lies must always remember, the truth has a very sharp nose. And no matter how carefully you hide the scent of your sins behind expensive perfume, the time will come when one invisible woman will look you in the eye and deliver the verdict. Because in a world where everything is for sale, loyalty and truth are the only essences that have no price tag, yet weigh more than all the gold in the world. Dawn over the Alarcon Empire had finally arrived, and this dawn smelled of the victory of those who had remained in the shadows for far too long.